I can't keep a pandero or a tambourine on my head, so if that's a problem for you, you can just fuck off. Instead, we are going to answer some questions. Hi everybody, Ari here. Thank you all very much for your continued support. And we have some questions here from patron member Mike Fergusson. So we're going to start with that, and we'll answer some other questions as well here. So Mike says, really enjoying the videos, just curious, given the music you play and the way you tune your bass drum, I'm going to guess you always let the beater rebound off the head. Are there specific situations where you bury it? Okay, so yes, there are specific situations where I bury it, and I usually do let it rebound off the head. Actually, Viv, if you can get a close-up of the bass drum, that would actually be probably really helpful. Most of the time, this is how it goes. So generally, it's really coming off the bass drum. You see that ringy sound, that open tone kind of ring. So the contrast of that is this. So that's where you bury it into the drum. And you really hear a difference between. You can even make a song. So that's so answering your question, situations where I would decide to bury it would be, for example, if I wanted to change the sound of the bass drum in a melodic way. But more practically speaking, I would bury it if I'm going to play some sort of like a groove or rock, funk, kind of a vibe in which I would want a more closed sound out of the bass drum. So I want to bring up also Gregory Hutchison, Hutch, who you know, great drummer and somebody that has influenced me. And I saw him play one time, and he'll just play like a really open sounding jazz kit. And this time in particular, he was playing a kit like that, and he was really rocking out. Like, everything sounded like a rock set of drums. Because he wanted to do that, and the way he was doing that on the bass drum was that he was pushing the beater into the head. But then as soon as he wants to come out of that, he just starts taking the beater off the head, and all of a sudden it sounds like an open, really straight ahead sounding kit. So. The specific situations when I would bury it would be that, from... You hear that, right? It's a much more closed sound. And so that's when I would use it like that. And also, there's a lot of times in my music that it is really called for to play on the same kit on the same song often, some sort of a groove, and also, some sort of a more open sounding jazz sound. So I do that actually pretty often. So Mike's next question, Mike Fergusson has a lot of questions, and I'm just going to answer them all. Mike, this whole video is going to be for you, my friend. He says, the first thing I want to ask you about is feathering the bass drum in a straight-ahead jazz context. Swing feel on the cymbal, bass player walks. Okay. So first of all, I want to make sure that everybody knows what feathering the bass drum means. And I know you're super comfortable over there now again. However, we have to have a shot of the bass drum again. Feathering the bass drum is this. The way that I feather the bass drum, first of all, I do usually do it open instead of closed like this. You can do it both ways, although that's just kind of a preference. Closed meaning sticking the beater into the head. I usually do it open again, and I often feather the bass drum on medium tempos, medium to slow tempos. It is, what it means is playing 4 to the floor, or all 4 quarter notes with your bass drum. And it's meant to, really support the groove of the music, to kind of double what the bass is already playing. That's the idea. And I'll probably get some trouble from some of you that the bass drum is too loud, because the bass drum is actually supposed to be more felt than heard. So it's supposed to be very soft, which is hard. It's hard to play it very, very soft. I don't feather that often, but it definitely happens. I'll feather at least some point during nearly any jazz gig. So I definitely do it, but I don't do it all the time. I actually use the bass drum more often as a melodic voice. So you're not really going to do both. Either it's going to be feathering. And you notice that also the other thing that I do it heel up, which is actually, I think most people that feather do heel down, but I just don't have the control heel down to do it like that. So I do heel up. So you're going to either be feathering the bass drum, or you're going to be playing more melodically, which is more syncopated and varying the rhythm. So those are the ways to do it. So let's talk a little bit more about feathering. Mike says, have you ever played with a bass player in a straight ahead setting who asked you not to feather? If so, then explain why. So that actually has not happened to me, but I have heard about it, and I have talked to quite a few bass players about feathering, and I asked them, do you not like feathering in certain cases? And actually, bass players tend to be a little bit more ambivalent than you might think about it. They don't care so much. There are some that care. Now, of course, if you're playing loud, they're going to care more. And the other thing that they would care about is the frequency of the sound. So if that frequency of your bass drum is close to the same, around the same pitch as where the bass is playing, that also is something that can get in the way, make the bass player not want you to feather. And so they could actually say, please don't feather because you're getting in the way of my range. So I've definitely heard about it happening. It has not happened to me. Okay, so we're going to continue with Mike Fergusson's question. When feathering, do you leave the beater in the head? Example, just letting it meet the head to achieve a soft muted sound rather than pressing it in or playing through it. So we just talked about that. Luckily, I answered his question already about that. I usually do not leave it in the head, although some people do. And it does rebound, but very, very, very softly, hopefully. Mike says, I read that you studied with John Riley. I believe John teaches to let it rebound when feathering, but I think he usually plays a fairly dead-sounding bass drum. I was lucky enough to meet him for a lesson this past fall when I visited New York, but our lesson didn't cover this. I did study with John Riley. I have nothing but great things to say about him. He was a wonderful teacher and player. However, my lessons with him also did not cover that. I did not ask him specifically about feathering the bass drum. So I'm not actually, really sure his take on it. But, like I was saying, I do let it rebound. That's just the way that I was also taught by Ed Soph about, getting a good sound out of the bass drum. And he's a real believer in letting the bass drum rebound off the head for a resonant sound. Do you mostly play heel down when you feather? If the heel does come up, around what tempo does this change happen? No, I play heel up all the time. That's just how I play. I would play heel down for one reason, which is balance. And if I'm doing a lot of stuff with the hi-hat, for example, that I need to bring my heel up on the hi-hat, then the right foot would stay down to keep my balance. But other than that, generally I put the heel up. It's not up high. It's just up a little bit, but it is heel up. It says, is there an approximate tempo where you stop feathering? Well, I do feather at medium tempos usually, medium to slow tempos. But there are times where I will feather a fast tempo as well. It's just, I probably won't do it for very long. But there's no real rule about, something reaching a certain tempo and then I stop feathering. Lastly, if there are any crucial points that my questions did not cover, please do add these. As well, if you feel I am asking the wrong questions or going about this in a less than efficient way, please let me know that too. So, Mike, no, absolutely not. They are very good questions, excellent questions. Happy to answer those, so thank you. And thanks everybody for watching this segment on Patreon. Have a good one.